Hello Learning Team 37. Welcome to our next lecture. This is week 5 already. I can't believe it. I don't know about you. And we're all thinking about our final reports. So I hope you remember that last week I put in the week 4 folder an outline for your final report with some notations as to what might be in each section. I also put a PowerPoint regarding graphics, what the range of your choices are, when certain choices make sense, when they don't, what the characteristics of a good graphic are. If any of you have any questions about these things during the next 2-3 weeks, don't hesitate, email, and if you're desperate, call and leave your number, and I'll call you back when I can, okay? But today, since you're all getting ready to start writing, and some of you have already begun writing, I thought I would give you some pointers on exactly what good professional writing looks like, what the characteristics of good professional writing are. So why don't we begin, okay? The key characteristics of good professional writing are brevity, clarity, use of numbers wherever possible, and the use of what we generally call pictorials, graphs, charts, tables, any kind of pictorial that allows your viewer to get as much information as possible in one single view, okay? And project managers use all of these characteristics in their writing to try to present to their clients the information that the client wants in a way that the client can be expected to absorb it, okay? The main thing to remember is, in many ways, professional writing is unlike academic writing. I've talked to some of you about this already. In academic writing, students often are told to write a 10-page paper, a 20-page paper. They feel a need to stretch. They're trying to find ways to turn that sentence into a paragraph so they can meet the requirements of length in a paper. Professional writing is almost the opposite of that. Here you want to get to the facts, just the facts, in a way that the general public could be expected to understand with as much brevity and clarity as possible. So let's talk a little bit more about these things. How do I achieve brevity? It's not as easy as it seems. And some of you have seen this already as you tried just to craft titles for Gantt charts. It's not easy to get down to the smallest number of words possible that expresses fully what you want to say. Well, how do I do it? First, you create a rough draft. And when you're creating a rough draft, my advice to you would be, don't worry about how you're expressing it. Don't worry about how many words you're using or whether they are the words you're going to finally end up with. Just get it down on paper. That gives you a feeling of security that you can do it and that you've done it. And it also allows you to get an idea of what your own thoughts are without getting yourself confused in the maelstrom of how should I express it. So now, after I've got my rough draft, I consider each sentence. I usually advise students, and this is what I do myself, it may sound a little crazy, but I say each sentence out loud. There's something about saying it out loud that really gives you an idea of what the listener is going to receive, what the reader is going to receive, that you just don't get if you read it to yourself. Somehow when you read it to yourself, you know what you intended the receiver to get, and it's easier to believe that that's what they're going to get. When you say it out loud, somehow it has that quality of interaction that allows you to see where you maybe express things inadequately, maybe you've taken too many words, or maybe you've stated something too vaguely. So I usually advise that you go through sentence by sentence and speak it out loud to yourself. Where you find things that you say, I wish I'd done that differently, have a yellow marker, write it in yellow, mark some marking so that you know that's a sentence you're going to go back over. Then go back over and make sure that each sentence that you've marked as possibly needing improvement is stated with as few words as you can without losing any of the meaning. And that I've spoken to many of you about is very difficult. It takes a lot of practice. So be kind with yourself at the beginning, because you'll find that it takes really more time and more effort to reduce something than to augment it. Make sure that there's no redundancy. In other words, make sure that you haven't said the same thing two ways. Again, when you read academic papers from students, sometimes, because they're trying to make a word limit, they will say the same thing or something that's roughly comparable twice. Make sure you haven't done that. Make sure that each sentence is necessary to the meaning of the entire report. Where it isn't, decide which sentence you like best and take the other one out. Make sure that each word and phrase in the sentence is necessary to convey the meaning. I can't be clearer than that. If you come across a phrase and you have no idea why it's there, if you have no idea what relevance it has to the meaning of what you're trying to say, take it out. And finally, translate longer sentences into shorter ones. Sometimes in academia, we learn to write long, complex, multi-clause sentences. In project management and any kind of professional writing, you really don't want to do that. Your goal is to write in such a way that a general audience has no difficulty comprehending your meaning on one reading. So if a client or a reader has to read your material twice in your report in order to understand what you meant, that's a failure. So go back, look at those complex compound sentences, divide them up into smaller sentences, say to yourself, would the reader understand everything? A reader who knows nothing about the subject. Sometimes what I've done is had someone in my family, or an assistant or a colleague read it as well. You might consider doing that so that they can identify for you what things they didn't understand on first reading. So that's how you achieve brevity. Now let's talk about clarity. How do I achieve clarity? First, when you go through your paper, you're going to identify any words or phrases that are open to interpretation. What kind of words are open to interpretation? Well, there are a whole class of general qualifying adjectives and adverbs that are really quite interpretable. Let me give you some examples. Many, most, sometimes, usually. All of these words are open to interpretation. What does usually mean to you? Does it mean 6 times out of 10? Maybe it means 8 times out of 10 to me. So these kinds of general qualifiers, some, all, well, all is clear, but some, many, most, the majority, even the word the majority means different things to different people. All of these words should be avoided. And where you find one in your draft, you mark it up and you go back and you replace it. You also eliminate, and this is a major downfall of many young project managers and graduate students who want to impress the reader with what they know, impress the reader with the understanding that they, the person who wrote it, is a professional who understands the language of the profession. And wanting to do that, they sometimes use technical language that they don't need to use, language that rather than making it easier for the reader to understand what you're saying, makes it more difficult or sometimes impossible. So go back, look at your report. Where you've used in profession lingo, where you've used words or phrases that would only be clear to people who had gotten a master's degree in health administration, take them out and put in a word or phrase that's more understandable to the general public. Eliminate acronyms. We're not going to put any acronyms in there. These sets of initials, TTP, EDF, They are cumbersome, and they interfere with the reader's flow. Never use acronyms. Spell out the words, and make sure that when you spell out the words, they're words that a reader with only a general background would have any hope of understanding, even when written out. If not, you must translate that phrase into language that someone in the general public would understand. But above all, no acronyms. Replace the general qualifiers, we've already talked about this, many, some, with specific numeric qualifiers. It's so much stronger. If I say, most respondents thought that chocolate tasted better than vanilla, what does that really tell me? Nothing. Let's be honest, nothing. If I say, however, 90% of the respondents felt that chocolate was superior to vanilla, does that tell me something? You bet. It tells me that 9 out of every 10 people that I spoke with felt that chocolate was superior to vanilla. So wherever possible, use numbers. It just helps the reader get an idea of the importance and the impact of what you're saying. Review your paragraph structure. This is also important for clarity. We all learned in grammar school, one subject per paragraph, right? I deal with a topic, I go to the next paragraph, I deal with another topic. But it's easy when you're writing a long paper to have 2 paragraphs, or more sometimes, commingle. Because you move from one idea to the next, but you don't move to a new paragraph. So go back and make sure, because again, you want to do everything possible in professional writing. Everything possible to make sure that the reader or listener gets it on one read or one listen and doesn't have to struggle at all to understand what you're saying. Because why? Number one, they won't struggle. Think about yourself. If somebody speaks to you in a manner that's unclear, if you don't understand their meaning, inside your head you're saying, wow, boy, he's really vague, or my goodness, is that circuitous? I can't understand what he's trying to say. And then what happens? You start thinking about something else. Your grocery list, what you're going to make for dinner, something else while you're politely nodding. So it's important, you don't want that. You want the reader or listener to be with you every step of the way. So try to do all of these things, and they are helps to keeping them with you. Use numbers. I've already said it. Wherever possible, replace a qualifier, many, some, most, sometimes, usually. Replace them with a qualifier, a numeric qualifier. 80%, 70%. 9 times out of 10, 20 of 24 respondents, things like that. Whenever possible, express proportions as percentages. Same idea. The more you can use numbers rather than qualifiers that are not numeric, the more you increase the level of depth of understanding, the depth of understanding of the person who's reviewing your work. Graphs, charts, tables, and pictorials. We've already been through this, and I've already told you all that probably 1/3 of your work in the final report, if it's a typical project report, will be pictorials. And what are they? Graphs, charts, tables that present a great deal of information to the reader or listener in one view. In one view. They are a tremendous invention and a tremendous aid to the project manager who's trying to convey large amounts of data in a very brief time. It shows patterns in data far better than any kind of narrative reporting could ever do. So remember why you're using them. You're using them to convey a large amount of data in a single view. I want to help the listener, the viewer, or the reader get this picture. So what do? I provide it with a title that's very accurate, very simple, and as short as possible so they know what they're seeing. I label everything, all of the aspects of the table are labeled so a person doesn't have to wonder, what is he seeing on the horizontal axis? What is he seeing on the vertical axis? He knows these things because you have labeled them. And where you've taken the data from something other than your own research, from agency records, from federal documents, from bank documents, it has to be at the bottom, sourced in very small letters. It has to say source : and then the source has to be identified. So why? So the person who's reading or viewing it can decide whether or not they want to give it any credence, whether or not it looks as though the source of the data is one that they should pay attention to. That's why. They must be readable, and many of you have been through this with me. It has to be readable up close, but you also, if you're going to orally present the way all of you are, you have to make sure before the day of your presentation that it's readable in the room in which you're going to be viewed. Now, all of you are going to be viewed in what is described to me as a classroom. So I'm assuming usually classrooms are about 30 feet, and sometimes 25 wide. I'll go out and measure it for you before the day arrives, but for now we're going to count on about 30 feet in length. So you have to make sure, each of you, that you get yourselves into some room that has 30 feet, and you see whether, and you see whether or not it's readable. And if not, you have to make the necessary changes to make sure it's legible. Okay. And they must not be too complex to allow rapid interpretation. Remember, when you show a chart or graphic to an audience, they don't have 10 minutes to absorb it. They don't have 5 minutes or 3 minutes to absorb it. On average, they're going to have 1 to 1.5 minutes to absorb the meaning and intent of this graphic. Therefore, any kinds of graphics that are extremely complex, showing multiple parameters, they're very, very difficult to get in 1.5 minutes. Very difficult. So you have to make sure that you convey the data in a graph, chart, or other pictorial that also can be interpreted by a reasonable person in about 1 minute to 1.5 minutes. Okay, so these are some of the general rules that you're going to follow as a professional writer. They're a lot different than the rules we've followed in writing academic papers in the past, I know that. And I wish each of you luck as you begin writing in this way for your career. Some of you already have, and that will help you. If there's anything I can do to assist you as you begin writing in this way, please email me or call me if it's an emergency, or bring it up at your weekly conference, and I'll do anything I can to help you. Have a great week, and I look forward to talking to each of you at your conferences. Bye now.